Are you Chinese?
What?
Are you Chinese?
No. Are you?
No.
Oh. Do I look Chinese?
Yeah.
Oh. I'm not.
What are you?
I'm half Japanese.
That's about the same.
Nah, not really. They're different.
The Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor,
Yes.
but we won.
Yes, which is good. I didn't do that. That wasn't me. I'm only half Japanese.
You speak pretty good English.
I remember always feeling really confused when someone used to ask me what I was. Eventually, when I found out what they wanted to know, I became sort of embarrassed. I had a pretty consistent answer of half Japanese and half Irish, but even so, it's always weird, especially as a kid, to look or be different. I always knew it meant receiving beautifully handcrafted presents from our relatives. Like this one, made entirely out of folded paper triangles. I also knew that I meant eating sticky white rice with basically every meal. And I knew it was something we didn't talk about that much.
It was a perfect bench. You could sit on it, strong enough to sit on it. But when we're done, you could tuck it under your table and be out of the way.
Who made it?
It was made by my dad. Probably during his years when he was in the relocation camps. It was made out of scrap lumber that they would find, that they could all use to make. So they had to make their own furniture because they weren't able to take anything with them. And it's survived all these years. It's strong built.
As a last name, Asai in Japanese means shallow well. As an adjective, it means shallow, superficial, or inadequate knowledge. My own lack of knowledge about my family's Japanese history is what led me to make this film in the first place. For the longest time, I didn't know that egg rolls weren't a Japanese dish.
2 packs should be enough, right?
Yeah.
If you were to ask me 10 years ago, or even my friends from home today, I'm sure they would cite my family's egg rolls as something that made us Japanese. We've made them for every big holiday, event, and birthday that I can remember. But egg rolls are traditionally Chinese, and we only make them because there's a recipe in a Japanese home cooking cookbook my grandma gave my dad when he first moved out after college. It's become sort of a tradition for everyone to sit around our kitchen table with a bowl of egg whites and a cutting board.
I'll take the pan and you can then slide that one in.
Okay.
I think these wrappers aren't really holding.
I guess we're pretty lucky because instead of giving us cookbooks when we move out, my dad just visits and makes egg rolls in our kitchens instead. What's it like being a chef in someone else's kitchen?
Different.
But I'm not crazy for thinking this was a Japanese practice. Rolling these egg rolls with these square-shaped wontons looks suspiciously like folding paper cranes. And origami is definitely Japanese. We folded 1,000 of these cranes for my sister's wedding a couple years ago.
This is the hardest part, so I can't make mine.
All right, no, wait.
Like that?
No,
But Annie
only one
says if
side.
you make a whole bunch, you'll
Sorry.
get.
Because it was Japanese tradition. And we love tradition. Do you know the story of, like, the crane folding?
The girl who made 1,000 cranes.
I don't think any of us actually know what the full tradition is. I know I don't. And does that change anything? My dad and his siblings never learned Japanese. Language is one of the most dominant markers of a culture, but my grandparents had every intention of blending in. My grandma and grandpa were evacuated from their homes in California, spending years forcibly incarcerated as Japanese American citizens during World War II. My grandma, Mayomi Sakaguchi, was at Jerome in Arkansas and worked as a nursery school teacher. Before Jerome, she and her family were kept in what they called an assembly center, but it was just a forced detention center, and really it was just an old racetrack, and they had to sleep in horse stalls. Her father, Tatsuo, was the first in his family to practice Christianity. He was a minister at the church at Jerome. This is my grandma's scrapbook, but she didn't take any of the pictures. The camps didn't allow cameras, so documenting life here was left entirely to the staff. With school and church, dances, and theater productions, internment life vaguely resembled normality. But like my grandma has said, it was almost a town, but you couldn't leave. There was a barbed wire fence around everything. My grandpa was sent to Tule Lake in California, one of the biggest incarceration centers, before swearing allegiance to the U.S. and joining the Military Intelligence Service. He kept an album too, but was able to take his own pictures in the military. If there's anything I want to take away from making this film, it's that my grandpa, who I never got the chance to meet, had great handwriting. He was extremely funny. He shot beautiful photographs. And he was definitely the coolest man any of these people had ever met. When the camps closed, the War Relocation Authority forced thousands of Japanese Americans to cities away from the West Coast. Chicago was one of these cities and ended up being where my grandparents first met. They got married a block away from where I live now on the University of Chicago's campus. In its peak, there were hundreds of Japanese-owned shops and restaurants. The first house together was in Lakeview on Seminary Avenue. This area was where thousands of Japanese Americans resettled after the war.
This reddish building, but that
Oh, it looks so much better.
What was it before? It was a two.
it was a
Two family.
double, two flat. But we had it as one house.
Right.
But in the last 50 years, the area has changed a lot.
It's different.
None of this is the same anymore. Let's see. Optometrist used to be in that building right there.
In its peak, there were hundreds of Japanese-owned shops and restaurants around Clark and Belmont.
So this used to be Toguri's up here.
Oh, where?
Right. Where was it? These. Right here. This one.
Right.
Where it says.
Wakefield Smiles.
Yeah.
My grandparents not only started their family in this time, but they started their own church too. This was or wasn't?
See, their original church was Christian Fellowship Church. It was over on Sheridan Road. They merged with Ravenswood, so that's what became Ravenswood Fellowship United Methodist Church.
They created a community of Japanese Americans where stories and values and language could be shared. But while so much of the city is different or gone now, so much of it is here. I've realized through making this film that Chicago means to me what it meant to my grandparents. Chicago means exploration and history and tradition. It means my family and now my community. Living here has changed my perspective on what it means to be half Japanese.
When you read the Korematsu decision from 1942,
I've gone to my Aunt Cheryl's house, where she let me look at all of these photos and treasures. Because of these old albums, I get to think that maybe I'm just like my grandpa. I have kind of nice handwriting, too. I get to go to family parties at the church gymnasium and anniversary celebrations. And just in general, I get to spend so much more time with my grandma and my relatives. Is this one green?
This
Green
one
tea?
is vanilla. This is
Just plain vanilla.
yeah, vanilla. Yeah. No, let's see. Ikubi. I don't know what ikubi means.
I can look it up for you. What is this one?
Cocoa.
Oh, like chocolate. Yeah, okay.
Annie's playing Chinese checkers with her grandmother. And losing.
Whoa. You can keep going. Oh, wait. You went to red.
I got to experience this magical machine for the first time.
People that pound the rice.
I made mochi with my aunts and cousins like they've been doing for years.
Thank you. Whoa.
So your mom and dad never did this, huh?
No.
No? And then you just kind of fold it over and, pinch it, just like, kind of like a dumpling.
I visited Japanese gardens in Hyde Park. I learned for the first time about the significance of the Japanese cherry blossom trees. They represent the human experience, beautiful but fleeting. It's like they're reminding us to pay attention. I know this was all very different for my grandparents. They had to create the community, not just participate in it. Living in Chicago came with the pressures of assimilation. They spoke Japanese to each other, but still never taught their kids. It's as if they considered knowing and speaking Japanese a burden. But what does having all this new information mean for me? Am I obligated to share it now? To pass it down? I think my grandparents were right, and culture is somewhat of a burden. And maybe I feel it too. I definitely used to get embarrassed about being different. I'd avoid conversations about Pokemon and sushi just to avoid people thinking I was too Japanese in some way. But I really like Pokemon and sushi, and I really love folding origami. And while making this film, I literally couldn't stop myself from making cranes. As I've gotten older, my anxieties regarding being half Japanese and having a Japanese identity have changed. The burden of culture feels different. Now I'm mostly concerned about losing it, or wasting it, or not learning enough when I had the chance.
So for the sauce, use this apricot preserves. And
That one's greasy.